What we've collected, yes, it's useful. Yes, we can see it's performing more or less as expected, but we're going to continue learning into Brazil and hopefully get some clean laps, some good running with that update kit.
Hello and welcome back to another Akkodis race debrief. My name's Jodie and joining us today we have Shov to answer your questions from the Mexico City Grand Prix. So Shov, we've been at a busy time in the calendar with 2 of the 3 races from the triple header completed. So how are the team feeling going into the 3rd race?
Well, the triple headers are particularly busy because if you're doing all 3 of them, you're working almost for an entire month non-stop, so no days off. And then you look at the last 2 weekends we've had, unfortunately, a fair bit of crash damage. Now, that puts a lot of work into the race garage. And we had a very, very late night in Mexico City trying to get George's car back together. It also puts a lot of work into the factory because we're trying to recover our spares situation, repair what we can, build up things that we can't. But looking forward to getting to Brazil, getting this one finished. There's then a couple of weeks where we can gather things back together, and then that final triple of the year.
So diving into our first question that's been sent in, were the team able to get some useful data comparing the old spec that George was driving on to the upgrade spec of Lewis?
Well, we've definitely got some useful data, and what we've seen from the update kit to date is it is delivering performance where we expect, certainly in terms of the loads that we're measuring and also the pressures that we're measuring on the aerodynamic surfaces. So that all seems fine. What we were hoping for that we didn't get to the full extent was a sort of clean run with both cars where they're in clear air, where we can see how they perform through the race. Now, Lewis was quick off the line. He got in front of George, but he was struggling with his balance in stint 1. We corrected that for stint 2, but then he had George ahead of him who'd had his front wing issue, that flap that had failed. So then the 2 cars spent an awful lot of the race in traffic, which does affect your analysis. But as I said, what we've collected, yes, it's useful. Yes, we can see it's performing more or less as expected. But we're going to continue learning into Brazil and hopefully get some clean laps, some good running with that update kit.
And talking about George's front wing that had failed, do we know where and how he picked up that damage?
Well, yeah, we had some rather convenient footage from the TV that showed exactly what happened. He was lining up for an overtaking manoeuvre. That caused him to have to run towards the middle of the track. There's a big bump there and he hit that at full speed. Now, when you've got the DRS, the car's going quicker because you've got less drag, but also you've lost a lot of load off the rear wing, which then lets the front wing push down further into the road. So the car's running extremely low. The bib had a big hit on that bump, and just the shock loading of that was enough to cause that flap to fail. Now, we need to make sure that doesn't happen. The car should be able to survive that, but it was quite an extreme case.
And was the issue with George's front wing, was that a big problem for him?
Well, we were quite lucky in that the flap didn't fall off. You know, sometimes you get that if you've crashed into someone. All that happened was it dropped down to its minimum position. So he lost a lot of aero balance from the car. It was safe to keep running in that condition, but it meant that he had a lot of understeer. So he was then having to drive around that problem. Now, he did a really good job because early on, we weren't sure whether it was going to be something we were going to want to come in again, make another pit stop and change the wing, but it turned out he was able to minimize the lap time loss so we could then keep him out and just run to the finish.
So next question, with our constructors' position pretty much set at this point, what do we plan to achieve over the next few races in order to set up a good baseline going into 2025?
Well, it's certainly a good opportunity for us to do a bit more experimentation in the race weekends. The key thing for us is making sure we've done the important bits of learning ahead of the 2025 season. Now, we're not bringing any more major updates to the car. It might be that we have some test items, some small bits of bodywork that we're looking at. But again, this would be very much in the context of learning for the future. So lots of opportunity to do setup work, lots of opportunity to use the 2 cars to compare different approaches, and hopefully over the next few we can just add to the learning that we've already made during this season.
So next question, what's the most challenging part in repairing a car like we saw for George in FP2?
Well, I mean, ultimately it's just the sheer workload involved in doing it. And if you look at a normal race weekend, the mechanics will come in on Wednesday morning and they'll start building the cars then. So they come out of air freight and they'll start assembling them, getting them ready. And they'll do that work right through Wednesday and then right through Thursday. So ordinarily, it's a 2-day job. Now there's various checks that you'll put in there, and you're doing the scanning to make sure that the bodywork's all in the right place, but around 2 days work for a crew. Now here we had George had the accident in FP2, so the mechanics are starting work late on Friday afternoon, and they've got to have the car ready to roll Saturday morning. So we had to break the curfew. Now you're allowed 2 of those exceptions each year, and this was the final one. So that luxury doesn't remain with us for the rest of the season. And they worked till the very early hours of the morning, went back, had a few hours sleep, came in again. So great job by the garage. Once Lewis's crew had finished his car, they all moved on to George's, and with a chassis swap, it really is starting from scratch. But for a lot of that, we had both crews working on it, which was how you're able to almost achieve the impossible of getting this car just built in a few hours overnight.
So you mentioned they've used up both of their chances to break curfew. So what happens if they need to use that again?
Well, if we needed to do it on another Friday night, the penalty is actually defined in the sporting regulations, and it's both cars start from the pit lane. So the reality is you would do everything to make sure you don't need to break that. And what that would probably mean in practice is that your car's not ready for FP3. So you come in when you can on Saturday morning, and then you just work as long as you can through FP3, hopefully to get the car ready for qualifying. But fingers crossed, we're not going to be in that situation.
So next question, will George have the repaired upgrade in time for Brazil?
Well, we're certainly hoping to achieve that. There's a lot of work going on here at the factory. That floor came back after Austin. It'll be on its way to Brazil any moment now, actually. And we're hoping to get that at the track on Thursday, ready to go onto his car. So all the plans are to achieve that, and we're confident that we'll be able to deliver.
So we saw a number of rookies going out for FP1. How do you assess Kimi's progress from that FP1 session?
We're really pleased with what we saw from Kimi. We were keen that he managed to do the entire session, which he did well. As you said, there were 5 rookies there. Kimi was the fastest amongst them, so that was good to see. Now, after the session, Kimi was probably a bit disappointed that he wasn't further up the timesheet. He'd certainly kept a lot in reserve on those low fuel laps, making sure that he kept the car on the track, didn't do any damage, because he knows the situation we're in terms of shortage of parts now. So I think he felt frustrated that he didn't go quicker. But from our side, very pleased with everything that we saw from him. At the moment, he's also spending the race weekends with the team. So he's understanding the flow of the sessions, the flow of the meetings, how you actually approach a Formula One race weekend, which is great. And then in between the race weekends, he's got a few tests where he's running our older cars. He's able to do that at some of the racetracks, just again to build up mileage, practice qualifying sessions, practice race distances. So that's all going to plan, and we're looking forward to getting him in the car next year.
And then finally, Shiv, what are our expectations going into Brazil?
Well, the main thing is it's a sprint race. So you've got 1 hour to get the car sorted. Now we can try and get a head start on that with good work in the simulator, try and make sure we've got a setup that when we hit the track, the drivers can really get into it, learning about the tyres, learning about the car. But that's the key challenge. Now, what do we think we can achieve? Well, recently we've seen McLaren and Ferrari very, very good in the slow corners. Brazil's got a lot of that in Sector 2. So we think they're going to be very difficult opposition. But for us, I'd say a podium would be a great result.